Welcome back to the Sherry Sylvester Show. We're broadcasting again from the Texas Public Policy Foundation's annual Policy Summit. My guest today is Jay Rubin, a longtime leader in the Austin Jewish community. I wanted to talk with Jay about what's going on currently in the war in Gaza and how that's being covered in Texas and covered in America. Jay has helped spearhead the planned unit development for the Dell Jewish Community College in 2008. He's focused a lot on the coverage of Israel in Texas, which is kind of unique. He served as executive vice president of the Hillel International from 1997 to 2006. He is a native of Brooklyn, but he has lived in Texas more than he's lived anywhere else in his life. Jay, welcome to the Sherry Sylvester Show.
Thank you, Sherry. And I have two native-born Texan children and two native-born Texan grandchildren. So
so you're a Texan.
We're definitely. And
as Lieutenant Governor Patrick told us yesterday, nobody comes to Texas. They come here, move to Texas, and then Texas moves into them.
Right. I've actually, lived here twice. So, I mean, so came back and not going anywhere.
And you taught at Texas State. Go Bobcats.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. And but one of the things I did there is I taught the first course about the Holocaust, and one of my colleagues there has been keeping it going for the last 40 plus years. So,
How did you choose it, or did it choose you?
In terms of?
How did you choose it? How did you first decide to come here?
Well, yeah, it was, having, studied for a PhD in history, looking for a job, and I got an offer to come to Texas State for a 3-year position, and lived in Austin, and got very involved in the community here, and at that point decided to change course and become a Jewish community professional to really work on in a sense a community organizer in Jewish communities, and I've done that. I'm now retired, but I've done that for a good almost 40 years.
And we have a very vibrant Jewish community, not only in Austin, but throughout the state.
Yeah, absolutely. And Austin has been an incredible source of growth. The first time I lived in Austin, when I was teaching in San Marcos, there were about 3,000 Jews in Austin. Today, that number is close to 40,000, if not more, because there's been obviously a lot of people that have within Texas who've come to Austin for obviously economic opportunity, and a lot of people from all over the world. The large Israeli community here now. A lot of Californians are getting here as fast as they can, and so we're seeing a tremendous amount of growth in the major cities in Texas. At one time, there were strong Jewish communities in a lot of small towns around Texas, and a lot of civic leaders got their start in those small towns and so forth. A lot of people emigrated into Texas from in Galveston back in the late 19th or 20th century. But right now, it's definitely focused on the major cities. Primarily, and they're obviously their regions, Dallas, Houston, Austin, and then San Antonio as well.
Well, one of the things that we learned during the election, we learned so many things in terms of the election, but that often the primary narrative has nothing to do with the reality. All through, after the October 7th attack, the Hamas attack in Israel, it was clear 80% of the country supported Israel. It wasn't like the country was divided. But still, even in Austin, we had protests, we had campus protests. The coverage today, I want to talk to you about some of it, is still very, very slanted towards the terrorists, not calling Hamas terrorists. What in the beginning, you're an Austinite. When you saw the protests at the University of Texas, what was your thought?
Well, again, right from the get-go after October 7th, Governor Abbott showed tremendous leadership, not only in going to Israel in solidarity and being there, but also when he came back, speaking at the Dell Jewish Community Campus here in Austin on October 7th, speaking again on a first anniversary of it. So we saw tremendous support. And when students around Texas began to mirror some of the activities that were happening in places like New York, at Columbia University, places like UCLA in California, and many other major flagship state universities around the country, he really came on very strong, as did many of the public officials in Texas, to not allow encampments, to basically bring in, a law enforcement in terms of that, and I think that played a major role. There are ways, obviously people are entitled to their opinions, even if they're wrong. But I think certain things, when you have a great deal of trying to intimidate others, trying to occupy buildings, vandalism, all of the things that we've seen around the country, I think we haven't seen that in Texas, and I give great credit, to Governor Abbott and other public officials and university presidents here in making sure that we did not mirror the activities in some of the other states around the
Right,
country.
exactly. Well, I know you don't, no one speaks for everyone, but it's been now a little bit over 500 days. What are people thinking now, particularly in what was in many ways the horrifying hostage exchange? It wasn't actually an exchange. This week, the youngest hostage, 4-month-old, the bodies of those two young boys and their mother and being promised and not being there. What is the general sense of where we are in the war?
I mean, there's, certainly today is a tremendously sad day after what happened yesterday. And it's just barbaric and unconscionable. And I think, again, that we're hopeful that to some degree, the leadership of President Trump and Secretary of State Rubio will have an impact on trying to move things forward. Israel is kind of unique in this sense. Everyone serves in the army for the most part. And they have a kind of a compact that when people are captured, or in the worst case, taken hostage, civilians, they'll do everything they can to get them back, militarily and otherwise. And that's what's happening now to some degree. I think Hamas has more than proved itself that they cannot be allowed to remain in Gaza. They cannot be any part of any kind of government. These are not civilized people in terms of what they do. And there was a ceasefire on October 6th, and they broke that on October 7th and murdered 1,200 men, women, and children, and kidnapped over 250 back to Gaza. The reality is that there needs to be some kind of a solution to this, because Israel cannot abide Hamas being in power on their borders ever again. And the other issue is obviously Israel has to, clearly they made a mistake in not being vigilant enough in anticipating this. Hamas, basically tried to stay under the radar on this. And really, most of the evidence now suggests this was going to be a major effort to destroy Israel, coming from the south in Hamas, coming from the north by Hezbollah in Lebanon, coming, with the Houthis, and of course the Iranian involvement, which was central to all of this. And the challenge going forward, Israel has shown militarily that it can defend itself with the support of being able to acquire weapons from the United States and develop some of their own sophisticated technologies. But I think, again, there was a major strategic mistake in focusing, primarily they were ready to take out Hezbollah, and they showed that they could do that. The problem was they made the poor assumption that Gaza was not going to be the problem, and it turned out that was a fatal mistake. And I think part of that is also one of the reasons why they're releasing these prisoners to get hostages back, as many as possible. But the war will not end until Hamas is destroyed and that Gaza is put on some kind of a different path to coexistence. There's plenty of people in Israel that would accept some kind of a two-state solution, but not until the efforts of the Palestinian terrorism is totally eradicated.
What do you, what is your thinking? The UN, I mean, the exchange of the bodies of the hostages, that was really, I mean, that's just another sign of their violating the ceasefire agreement.
Totally.
And that's not who it's, they didn't have the mother. And
I mean, that's, again, you can tell from the shows that they put on. Most times when hostages are released or prisoners are exchanged, it's a quiet, thing that's done, between two parties. If you see the videos of what they do, they parade the hostages. They it's a total disgrace in terms of that. And there is no peace possible with Hamas. And you asked before about about how college campuses work. I mean, part of the problem here is, yes, there's no question that Israel has strong support among the American people by and large, and people remember what happened during the Holocaust. They remember the wars of '67 or '73. They understand. That they read their Bible and they understand that Jews are not interlopers into the land of Israel. They are the indigenous people in the land of Israel. And they understand that Israel is a multinational country with, where you have 2 million Muslims, Arab Muslims living in Israel as full citizens, as well as, 7+ million Jews living there. The effort here is not to create peace on the part of the Palestinian terrorists and Hamas in particular. It's to destroy Israel and to commit a real genocide, not a fake genocide. Unfortunately, civilians die in war, especially when you're using them as human shields. That was never the intent. The war was started by Hamas, and Israel, God willing, will end this war in a way that it can live in peace and security going forward.
Well, you have done so much work to make, particularly in the university community, in terms of Holocaust education, but we've still got these things that are so alarming. UN has not acted, still not moving, and Margaret Brennan on CBS this week, Secretary Marco Rubio, had to push back, came out with an incredible narrative that trying to parallel the Trump administration to the Nazis, saying they had weaponized free speech, forgetting that the Nazis burned thousands of books, and it was illegal to say anything against. I mean, when you see that, and this is CBS, this is not some left wing, this is CBS.
Listen, we're dealing with, in many ways, a generation of university students who are caught up in these absurd narratives of oppressor or oppressed, and see the world through that prism and that prism alone. And Israel has become, in many cases, for them, the litmus test of this, that somehow not understanding that Israel is a multiracial society, a multi-religious society. It's a society where there is a democracy, where there is free speech. And the areas where there isn't free speech are places like Gaza, where you can, obviously be slaughtered, if you speak freely and have a difference of opinion in terms of that. And I think, part of the challenge is really, trying to, educate young people and trying to look at what's happened in many of our universities where, you're getting a unipolar worldview and people are basically, not familiar with the whole story or with the cultures or anything like that. It becomes simply an effort to pretend that somehow you're helping the oppressed when in fact you're aiding those who are oppressing.
It's amazing, and TPPF gets a lot of criticism for what they call, they say this all the time, our Bible-based curriculum. And of course, one of the things that they're very critical of is that we put Moses in the curriculum as since that was having one deity, that was a pretty dramatic move forward for the advancement of civilization, regardless of your religious thinking about it. But there is that blowback where people don't have the basics.
Yeah, look, I think, and we see that even in the Jewish community, as there are, again, a lot of people who've moved here from other parts of the country. And, it's a little bit different. They're not used to seeing so many, such a large, Christian population, so many active churches and so forth. And times have changed. I mean, Texas is where Pastor John Hagee and Cornerstone Church has developed, Christians United for Israel, and has been a mainstay of that and spread that everywhere. So there, a lot of people are kind of living in the past, where somehow they believe that Bible believing Christians are somehow anti-Semitic by nature, and somehow the left wing socialists and others are philo-Semitic. That was true maybe at one time. When I grew up in New York, most of my family were called themselves democratic socialists. They were involved with trade unions and the garment industry and things like that. But they were all Zionists. And now we have people who call themselves democratic socialists who are basically totally anti-Israel, feel Israel shouldn't exist and it should be totally controlled by forces that want to see their destruction. It's the world turned upside down. And I think that we got to figure out how to get it right side up again and get people to really understand who their friends are, who their advocates are, and how to work together.
I'm an Anglican. Not everybody knows this, but one of our first prayers every service is, "Thank you, God, for choosing the people of Israel." It's an opening prayer. What, on a little bit different topic, what do you think of Trump's plan on the Gaza Strip? He's a builder.
I think it's bold and audacious, and going to be very challenging to make it happen, largely because, look, Egypt and Jordan don't want, Palestinian refugees.
Why is that?
Well, simply because they basically they are Islamist fundamentalists connected to the Muslim Brotherhood, and their goal would be ultimately to overthrow the governments of Egypt and the government of Jordan. Jordan had to kick out Palestinian PLO back in the day in the Black September movement. That was back. King Hussein, did that. Egypt had a Muslim Brotherhood president for a short time, and then the army revolted.
Morsi,
so they know what they're dealing with. Even though it makes perfect sense, they have a lot of free land available in Sinai. Jordan is largely a Palestinian country by population. But what's happened is that just like what happened after World War II with the denazification of Germany in terms of education and other things, and the same thing happened in Japan by having the emperor become immortal and invisible, and changing Japan from one of the most warlike societies into one of the most prosperous and peaceful. That's got to be what happens in terms of Palestinians, because otherwise there's not going to be much of a future for them, for sure. And Israel will continue to defend itself and to be what it seeks to be, a light unto the nations. There's so much involvement, between Israel and the United States in terms of military and civilian technology, high tech, all sorts of incredible involvement with Silicon Valley here, with Austin, where many of the companies here have R&D operations in Israel, where many Israelis live and work here now for Texas-based companies in terms of that. So there's real opportunity in the world, and the goal ultimately is to make that opportunity, make the Middle East become a place of peace and prosperity. And I think some countries there get it with the Abraham Accords. But unfortunately, October 7th has been a real setback for the future of that region.
So, and as you mentioned, Governor Abbott has been frequently goes to Israel, and he didn't just go after the attack. And we do have a lot of economic exchange programs and lots of economic working, collaborating with Israelis. I wanted to ask you one last question. Barry Weiss wrote this week about the story of the hostage exchange and how the New York Times wrote that their comment was that it was very difficult for Israelis to watch, as if it wasn't difficult for everyone to watch. And I wondered, where do you see, what's in the Statesman, what's on KXAN? How is the coverage here, and based on the work that you've done?
You know, newspapers and even television stations aren't as influential and important as they once were.
Thank heaven for that.
And we're doing a podcast now, and that's very much more prevalent. That's where, podcasts are where I spend way more time than watching news on television or elsewhere, or reading newspapers. And I think that's one of the realities. So in a sense, I haven't seen much. I mean, occasionally I look at a Sunday newspaper online, and typically, letters to the editor, things like that. Sometimes the headlines are really screwed up. So much of media has become homogenized. I mean, they're all Gannett newspapers, although the Statesman now is going with, Hearst in terms of that, which is interesting. But for the most part, with the exception really of, things like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, most daily newspapers have become somewhat irrelevant, unfortunately. So times have changed in regard to that.
Yeah.
But I think again, what's unfortunately happened is we're all, because of what's happened in media, we're all mostly getting our news from places that we agree with. So people on the right are listening to news podcasts and other things on the right, and people on the left the same thing. There hopefully someday will be a market for people to come together and have these discussions. There already are some. I've gotten kind of hooked on Mark Halperin's two-way, which I find fascinating in terms of that. But in regard to that, I don't think the media is having that much influence. I think for the most part, right now, the country is fairly polarized, but on this issue, it's very clear there's been a sea change. When I was, growing up, it was the Democrats who were largely vehemently pro-Israel, and the Republicans were pretty ambivalent at best in many cases. And there's been a total sea change in regard to that, because I think, again, there's a recognition that Israel and America are dealing with many of the same enemies and are creating the kinds of free societies and technologically advanced societies that are the best hope of the world going forward.
Absolutely. So we've got about 30 seconds. Would you say that you're optimistic under Trump's leadership, what's happening in Texas, or no? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yes, I'm hopeful. Optimistic is a hard word to use when you're talking about the Middle East, but I'm hopeful that on all those levels we're going to be in a better place. Israel has to be in a position to defend itself. There were some challenges during the Biden administration in allowing them to do that. I think that in general, I'm hopeful that the next year will be better than the last two.
Jay Rubin, thanks so much for joining me today on the Sherry Sylvester Show, and thank you all for joining us today. You can get my podcast, The Sherry Sylvester Show, at Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to sign up for my newsletter, Ninth in Congress, which includes my weekly rundown on winners and losers, go to www.texaspolicy.com/Ninth in Congress. See you next time.